Carlos is with us. Carlos is in Indianapolis. Hi, Carlos. How are you?
Hi. Good. How are you, David?
Better than I deserve, sir. How can I help?
Thank you so much. I am actually facilitating the course in Spanish, the Andres Gutierrez Spanish version of Financial Peace University, and it's an incredible pleasure to do that.
Well, thank you. Andres is a wonderful teacher. I'm glad you're doing that.
He does a great job. And the question that I need to make sure that I know how to answer has to do with investments on 401k plans or mutual funds, especially with respect to the scenarios that are given that are kind of using a pretty high level of interest, accumulation. And I know my own investments have not done well in the past couple of years. So what are we saying nowadays? So what kind of return can we, expect to get in the long term? Of course, these investments are long term, but not seeing the same level of returns we've seen before.
Well, anytime the market's down, you would say that you're not seeing the same level of returns as you've seen before. The way you're phrasing that, it sounds like you think that that's the projection into the future. I don't know that. I don't know that it's bad into the future or good into the future. If you go back, for instance, in time prior to, say, into the early 90s, you would have said the same thing. You would have said, these returns have been lackadaisical. Oh, it's been awful. It's been a hard time. And then all of a sudden you get a zoom decade.
Yep.
And that throw the averages all up. And then, as soon as that decade's over, you roll into 2008 and it goes in the toilet, right? It's just horrible. I mean, it's the worst downturn in the market's history, or one of the worst downturns in the market's history, and just horrendous times. And, that throws the numbers off. And then we come back and we're back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And these current returns are screwed up more by oil than anything else. Oil stocks are down because oil profits are down. In general, other companies are making money, but the oil stocks are dragging the rest of the averages down if you're looking at across that. And that's what we're sitting in the middle of right now. But what I'm looking at is if I look at a growth stock mutual fund in my 401k, my personal 401k, and I look at the average annual return over the history of that fund, and that fund is 50 years old or 80 years old or 40 years old, and I look at that average, that's the average I'm going to use. And it's not that far off of what's in those returns in those videos. Okay. You can find that. Now, again, if you want to shorten up your return window that you're looking at, you can create all kinds of scenarios that would demand that you project lower. And if you personally think there's a black cloud over the future, then you would project lower. These are examples. They're not guarantees. They're examples of what the market has done. And really what I want to do and what you want to do and what Andres wants to do more than anything is to teach people to think. Not to teach, not to tell them just do this blindly because you said do it or I said do it, but teach them to think. My personal portfolio has done about what, we project on those things. And I've had some years it did a whole lot better. And then I've had some years it did a whole lot worse. But, my personal portfolio's outperformed the S&P 500. And I'm not a rocket scientist. I mean, you can pick mutual funds in the average 401k if you look, that can outperform the S&P. And that's what you're looking to do. If you did that over the last decade, because you've got 2008 in the last decade, you'd be down around 9% after fees. But if you reach back past the last decade where you don't have that 2008, see, statistically, you know how numbers work. I can tell by talking to you. Statistically, if you just take a big chunk out of the numbers with a huge downturn like 2008, it takes an amazing shoot up in the market just to keep the averages where they were.
Yes.
And so the only way to smooth the thing out is to go longer into the history to get a more accurate view, I think. But if you say, well, the future is not, there's just all these things, there's all these problems. Well, there's always been all these problems. In any point in history you look, there was something to make us worry and think that the future wasn't bright. I don't know what the future is going to hold. I don't know. I make my choices on mutual funds based on their past history. but I don't know that that's going to be the future. I make my choices when I buy a piece of real estate based on the quality of the neighborhood, but I don't know that they're not going to move a toxic waste warehouse in next door. I don't know that. I can't be sure of what's going to go on. All I know is what I've got to look at when I'm buying that particular piece of property. And there's no guarantee when I buy that piece of real estate, but I bought it in a good neighborhood. There's nice big trees, and people seem to be using their weed eaters. And, I believe we're going to be in good shape here. And, nobody's got their car up on blocks in the front yard and trying to plant stuff in it or something. And so that's a good neighborhood, and I'm going to be okay with that. But it could change. I mean, the neighborhood I grew up in has changed. It's a lot of you look back at the old neighborhood, and I didn't think anything about it at the time, but it can turn into the hood over time. You know what I'm saying? And so you just got to watch what you're doing. And the same thing's true of the mutual fund. What neighborhood is it in? And how do I feel about the future and the prospects of that? But I'm not going to completely condemn the stock market as an investment vehicle based on what it's done since December, or based on what it did in 2008. And if you don't want to use a 12% number, use an 8% number. Use a 5% number. I don't care. But you ought to base it somewhat on logic. And logic would be looking at the past over a long period of time and looking at a particular fund over a long period of time. And that's logical, and that's reasonable. And Carlos, if you go on the internet, you will find that a lot of people criticize me over this. So, but they don't understand. They say I'm somehow guaranteeing someone a 12% rate of return. I'm not. I've been able to make more than that. But I'm not, and I'm not a rocket scientist. I'm really not. But, maybe you can't. Maybe you haven't been able to find a fund that does that. So you need to use your brain. This is your message to your class, Carlos. You need to say to them, use your brain, learn how this works, and pick good funds. Pick good things that have a good history, just like you pick out a home in a good neighborhood. That's the point. We're teaching people to think. You don't want people blindly following anyone's financial theory or idea. They need to learn, and they need to think, and then that lines you up to win long term. Really good question. Thanks for bringing that up. I appreciate it. This is the Dave Ramsey Show.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, click the subscribe button to get the latest content and check out these other great clips from the show.
You are not a victim. You're not a victim of big corporations. You're not a victim of Wall Street. You're not a victim of capitalism. You're not a victim of wealth inequality. You're not a victim of racism. You're not a victim.